Hi, folks. So I'm here today. I'm joined by Byron Chan, Anna Loomis, Jessica Cope Williams from Catholic Family Services, and we're meeting here in this virtual space. But just want to acknowledge that we're all kind of in different places on Treaty 7 territory, and just acknowledging the place that we are, the space that we're kind of sitting in, and the fact that we're almost in each other's homes in a way. And if you're watching this in some place in the world, it's almost like we're coming into each other's space today. So I just want to acknowledge that this like coming together and the places where we land and live. We're here to talk a bit about the co-leadership model, um, for the co-CEOs of the organization, and we'll go through some questions today, but keep it fun and fluid. Yeah, and is there anything else you wanted to say, any of you, in terms of setting the context about why we're here? Anything I left out?
No, Nick, I heard
Oh,
you're a master of setting context and you just did a masterful job there.
Oh, thanks for that. Thank you. Yeah, so kind of a first question is how did this leadership model come about for CFS? And maybe Anna, you can kind of kick off the
sure.
discussion on this, and maybe it would helpful to share what your role is, because I didn't do that.
Sure. No, yeah, master of context setting and intros too. Thank you. I'll introduce myself. Yeah, Anna Loomis. I've been a volunteer with CFS, or Catholic Family Service, for a long time, going back about 20 years, but have been serving on the board for just over 4 years now, and moved into the board chair role last fall. Um, Prior to that, I was the vice chair, so I was really involved in a CEO transition that we did last year, and that's kind of the reason, the kind of impetus for the co-CEO model and how it came about, is because the board and the organization went through a leadership transition in 2020. So our executive director, or CEO at the time, Patricia Jones, left to go to the Homeless Foundation and take on a more sector-wide role. And there was an opportunity to look at the leadership model of the organization. And one of the options that the board considered was a shared leadership model. So yeah, at the time, Jessica and Byron were in senior director roles, and they were kind of rising talent within the organization, and certainly part of the succession plan for Patricia. And when we were evaluating alternatives, we kind of looked at, appointing one as an internal, considering a co-CEO model, or looking externally and looking to bring in outside talent. So the board kind of did a rigorous process to evaluate those options and considered a number of factors, which led us to trying something new and doing the co-CEO thing, and going forward with the shared leadership model. So that's a bit of the history for how we came to this model today.
Yeah, you shared a bit about, and I've heard this in a lot of my conversations with you all, this piece of succession planning, and you just brought in Patricia into the conversation as well. I'm just curious, what role did she have in bringing about this co-CEO model?
Well, I think a large role. I mean, she was challenging us as a board to consider this as a viable option. She knows the organization best, and at that time knows the gifts and the strengths that both Byron and Jessica bring. And it really was an idea that came from her, as a viable option for us to consider as a board. So I'd say she had a large part in promoting this new innovative model.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm curious, before it came about, before the offers were made, and people were promoted. What were your hopes and fears about the co-CEO model as a board?
Well, I think from a hope perspective, I mean, I always like to start on the positive. A lot of optimism and a lot of confidence in both Jessica and Byron, and what they brought in their terms of their working relationship and the complementary skill sets, and and kind of seeing the opportunity for how this could increase leadership capacity for the organization. So a lot of good things. I think on more the fear or maybe the reservation side, of course, it's a different way of looking at leadership. So it's not the traditional model. Usually, I don't know what the expression is, but one throat to choke, or one person who's in charge around here, this kind of idea. So many of our board members are used to that more single leader kind of hierarchical, let's say more of a corporate view on leadership. And so there were some interesting discussions, let's say at the board level, to talk through the pros and cons of moving forward with a shared leadership model, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, and Jessica and Byron, I want to get to you, but one more thing, Anna. I'm just curious, what happened to the relationship of the board through that process of discussing co-leadership?
Well, I think it was an opportunity to strengthen the relationship between the board and the management or the leadership. We actually didn't jump to it overnight. We had a lot of discussion and evaluated those options. And then we actually did a bit of an interim period. So I think it was, Jessica, Byron, keep me honest, but 3 or 4 months where we had appointed them as in kind of acting roles. 5 months, yeah.
5 months.
You'll remember every day of it. But we kind of piloted the model in an interim state, and my role was as a kind of a board liaison to support Jessica and Byron as they moved into that new leadership role. And then we had a checkpoint as a board after that conclusion of that kind of interim period, where we decided that it was actually going very well, and we had full confidence in both of them to continue on in that shared leadership model. So that kind of, let's say, eased the board into it a little bit in terms of not necessarily committing to something that we had some questions about, but doing it on a bit of a trial basis as part of the kind of succession, let's say, process.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm curious, Jessica and Byron, what is you've been listening, and curious, what was your experience in co-creating this, or being invited into the co-CEO model? Who's going first?
Like,
I can see you looking at each other.
This is fun. This is the fun part of the shared leadership. Gracious.
The worst is when we talk over each other. That's worse than the silence. So now we kind of try and wait a little bit, but like a game of chicken.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Patricia, Anna, because she had approached, at the same time she was having the conversations with the board, she had approached Byron and me and said, I think you should consider this. I think you should consider pitching this to the board. And we were both like, what? How would that work? Like, I think the same questions that everybody has when you first introduce the co-lead model. And so what we were able to do is build on the working relationship that we had established as senior directors. So Byron and I both came into that senior director role at the same time, and those were new roles. And it was a new executive office at that time. And so what we were able to do is, I think, take the ways that we had learned about working together and working to our strengths, but also a real recognition of what the other brings to the table. And so, when I was in the senior director role of programs and services, I was already in the habit of consulting with Byron on different decisions because he thinks differently than I do. So I didn't have to in that role, but I did because it made for better decisions. And so what we then had to do was move to a place where we had that co-leadership relationship with our board chair, with the board executive, but it already existed internally. It was already something our team was familiar with. And that was the built-in succession planning that I think was Patricia's brilliance.
Yeah, a lot of your conversation, I've heard the importance of your relationship in making this work. Yeah, Byron, how about you? What was your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I held up the 5 there because it's ingrained into our minds, because we just kind of joke around about how it was the longest job interview we've ever had in terms of doing this 5-month interim period. But and we can comfortably say this in hindsight now, but it was good. There needed to be some time for the board to familiarize themselves with this new model of leadership. And we also engage an independent evaluator to do a rapid assessment, and so we kind of separate out the duties of, this independent evaluator evaluating the effectiveness of the model for the organization. And then the board would do their own concurrent evaluation process of, Jessica and my performance respectively within that model. So it gave way for, quite a robust evaluation on all fronts to ensure that if we were going to this model on a permanent and indefinite basis, that it was grounded in robust evaluation and not just on it seems to be working okay, so let's move forward. So, in all honesty, it was, as Jessica mentioned, it was novel to us. It didn't take us long for us to find really strong alignment on not just how we pitch it to the board, but on how we actually make sure that it is successful for the organization, that it is conducive for our working styles and how we're going to be working together. And it was almost, it might have been a little bit naive at first, but as Jessica said, because we had this experience of working as senior directors, ascending to those roles in the same time, those senior directors roles came about as a result of an organization restructure, where we took a former director of operations role that was one and split it into two because of the way the organization had grown and the ambitions that we had set out to achieve. It made a lot of sense. So a lot of actually the messy part of splitting one role into two was taken on 2 years prior to the implementation of the model. So it kind of led to this, and I say kind of naiveness, but this almost like irrational confidence that there was going to be no hiccups, that there were no big learning bumps that we had to go through, because we had already established this really seamless way of working together, and more importantly, had built up the trust and rapport and the relationship where we didn't have to navigate those dynamics and figure those out. Those were already well ingrained in what we had.
Yeah, and when you talk about everything that happened before, it really sounds like this was an evolution. It wasn't a decision that happened at one point in time. There was such an evolution of events that led to this. Well, can we say success yet? I feel like we can. Or maybe I should ask you all. We'll get into that. We'll get into that now. So along those lines, you said to keep it fun, right? So along those lines, what are the advantages and maybe disadvantages of this co-leadership, co-CEO model?
I'll go. And Jessica spoke to this as well. It's the decision making. The benefit is that Jessica and I come from very different educational backgrounds, very different work experiences, kind of different social networks, like everything. What we're fiercely aligned in is our values, and aligned in that whatever decision we're making and how we're going to lead is going to be for the best interests of the organization and the people that we serve. So having those two things established, and like I said, we've spoken quite a bit already about the trust and rapport, knowing that that's not in question, it's allowed us to really approach any issue. And don't get me wrong, like we disagree often on how to approach a specific issue or our viewpoints. Because we're able to do that without any level of personal investment or defensiveness, we're able to really hash out issues and hear one another out. And in many, many cases, it's not Jessica's way or my way. It's a hybrid of the two. It's a taking of the best of what we've been able to bring forward and say, you know what, this makes a lot of sense. And we wouldn't have arrived here if we had not had the opportunity to formally engage in that discussion. And it's, at the risk of making it sound like it's super inefficient and we engage in this level of discussion for every decision in the organization. It's not that way. We've been able to carry on the portfolios that we had held in our senior director roles as our default primary responsibilities. So by default, Jessica is responsible and oversees our programs and services. And by default, I primarily oversee our strategy and infrastructure. And so we hold a joint accountability for the whole organization and all those functions, but there's just a streamlined efficiency in being able to understand, okay, this is where Jessica is going to go and this is where I'm going to go. And then for the significant decisions for the organization, then we're able to come together and really consult with one another to move forward with what we've seen in action in many cases, a better decision because of the ability to go through it together. The other one I'll speak to is I don't know how to frame this succinctly, but it's about the sustainability of the role on all fronts. You know, when we came into this model, we were very fortunate that we had, you know, great peer relationships across the sector. And when we did a little bit of a roadshow and meeting with other executive directors and CEOs across the sector, almost unanimously, they had thrown their weight of support behind us and saying, yeah, I think this is amazing what you guys are doing, and espoused, even though they weren't in the model themselves, they could definitely see the benefits of the model. You know, they often spoke to a loneliness or an isolation in the role of, you know, even if they had great relationships with their board, great relationships with their leadership team, there was something different about kind of being in that role and shouldering those responsibilities as an individual. And not only that, there's also a growing recognition of, you know, a bit of a succession crisis going on in the sector, where you have leaders that have been in their respective CEO or ED roles at their organization for quite some time, many without a lack of a clear succession plan. And seems to be a lack of emerging young leaders that are wanting to take on those roles. So, you know, one of the things that we set out to is like, how could this change people's understanding of what a nonprofit executive role entails? And how can we model something that, you know, both Jessica and I have young families with young children. And in speaking to some, it's been great for them to see that we've been able to fulfill these roles and care for our young families concurrently, and that they don't have to come at the expense of the other. So, you know, that's benefits that we've experienced for ourselves. And, you know, when I think about benefits for the model overall, we've certainly, that was hypothesized in conversations that we had at other leaders. And, you know, 9-10 months into the model, we're certainly realizing them.
Yeah, thanks. How about for you, Jessica? What do you see as the benefits?
Yeah, well, we'll see, because what's really important is what Anna thinks the benefits are.
I'm letting you guys go first.
You know, I agree with everything Byron said. I would add one of the things that's just brought, I think, some efficiency to our work is the ability for the Catholic Family Service CEO to be in 2 places at once. And so Byron and I are not in meetings together often, intentionally, and have sort of set up processes for updating each other about, you know, what happens at those meetings. So we can be interchangeable if we need to be. But I think that allows CFS to have a greater presence in the community and be connected at the, you know, various tables that we're involved in. And so I think that's a real perk. I think that's also a perk for staff, right? So sometimes if senior leaders are external facing so much, staff internally don't feel like they're seeing them as much. And so we're able to play to that benefit. And then to the sustainability point, as Byron was saying, the CFS CEO never goes on vacation. There's always a CEO. When earlier this year, my dad got quite sick, and so I had to take a little bit of time off, and we had no interruptions because of that. And I felt like it was okay to not be at work. So I think that sustainability works on 2 sides. It works for us personally. I think it works for the organization as well. And so that's been a real positive. And I think the other benefit is I think, and we'll see as we continue to evaluate this, but I do think this normalizes healthy conflict in an organization. As you know, for example, our senior leadership team would certainly see that Byron and I don't always agree about anything. We don't have, you know, you'll see, likely see at some point in this interview, Byron and I tend to be a little irreverent with each other. So we don't have an untouchable or an uncriticizable CEO, since we're the first ones to criticize each other usually.
Or sometimes yourselves, I've noticed.
It's usually actually just criticizing me and me just taking it.
That's fair. That's fair. And so I think that levels things a little bit in the organization in terms of having leaders who can lean right into adult conversations and say what they really think, regardless of the positional power differential.
Yeah, and Jessica, even when you were saying, talking about being there for your family, being able to step away, I wonder what value it is for the organization that you can fully step out and be present in your life and then come back, because I think we often undervalue that. It's not, to me, it's not just of service to you as a human, but I think your ability to be able to step out and to be really present with your family, it also gives something back to the organization. I'm not sure what, but I think there's some sort of good reciprocity there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, being able to come back actually refreshed, right, and recharged, and having done the things you need to do with your family and take care of maybe personal side of things, and then coming back to give your best to the organization. Makes sense. Yeah, Nick, I mean, from the board's perspective, and maybe some of this is my own personal kind of observation, I think we've got more leadership capacity for strategic stuff, strategic discussions, thinking about where does the organization want to be in the next few years, engaging in more strategic discussions around collaboration and cool things that we can be doing in the community with others. So that's been a real plus. And then definitely the coverage, like from a succession perspective, I think it actually helps us because, if anything were to happen, let's, hopefully not, but to either one, we have somebody there who can continue on and to lead the organization without the typical kind of interruption that you would see in a kind of an emergency, let's say, succession situation that a lot of organizations would have to face. So that's, I think, a really good benefit of the model. And then, one of the things we were considering last year, given COVID and the changes that have happened, everybody feels it, nonprofit and private sector alike. And then going through that leadership transition of a really strong CEO leaving the organization, we felt it was really important to have stability for the organization. And so both Jessica and Byron, being able to take in on this new model has, I think, been a very positive message for the staff. Committed to that things were actually going quite well, and we didn't need to bring in someone externally to change things up because we were actually headed in a really positive direction. So it's a nice message for staff to say, when we have high performers, we have people who are doing the job well, that there is career growth and opportunity and leadership opportunities for people. So yeah, I think those are a few benefits that come to mind for me.
Yeah, and it feels like we talk mostly about what's good about it, and I'm just curious about what is also challenging about it. I don't know if you want to start, Anna, but
sure. Well, I mean, besides getting the whole board used to a new model, which I think we're there, and everyone's excited, and it's been going well. So I think we're kind of past that now. But maybe there's a perception out there, or a perception in the community of, who's in charge or whatever. So that kind of communication out to the community about the shared model and, portfolios of responsibility and which strategic relationships each one is the primary on, that was important. But also maybe a perception of, well, you've got two co-CEOs, isn't that expensive? Isn't that pricey? When in fact, and Byron and Jessica jump in, but we've actually reduced our kind of leadership cost because of the structure of the co-CEO model and not having backfilled those two senior director roles. So we're actually, in my view, getting more leadership coverage and a more effective, better model, and it actually is less costly for the organization overall. So that might be a perception or a kind of a myth out there of the model, and in our case, it's not true.
No, that's an important piece, I think, around, and it's connected to the efficiency. And the way that we're able to work together, because we're integrated and updating each other and doing all of those pieces, it actually, our directors have said, is that it simplifies decision making because it doesn't have to go through two layers to get to approval. either one of us approves something, or we'll say we'll get back to you with a decision from both of us, but it's not 2 layers of decision making anymore, it's just one. And we were able to put some of those resources into a layer of leadership underneath our directors that allow our directors to take on an even greater leadership role, kind of supporting them to be more strategic and externally facing, which ultimately is good for CEO succession as well. And so now I'm back to talking about benefits, and that wasn't your question. But I'm used to reframing questions about challenges to the CEO role as benefits.
Good catch. I was just really enjoying what you were saying.
But from that, challenges perspective, I think, we have to have our eye pretty closely on the efficiency piece. Like, the worst thing in the world is for both of us to spend time reviewing a document that, ultimately isn't that important a document. And so that's an evolving process and a trust building between the two of us around who's going to do this and what needs to be reviewed jointly. And what decision making happens that we're just doing an informing of the other versus an engaging the other. We do a lot of hope it's okay that I did this, right? And I think we're continuing to sort of fine tune that piece of the decision making. And the other one, and Anna brought this up, that it can be a perception that people don't have the decision maker in the room, right? And the way we've had to work with that is it is really a trust in the other, that if you're in that situation where they're expecting a decision, that you make it, and the other one's going to have your back, knowing that that's what had to be done in the moment.
Yeah, and I think you've all kind of spoke to the fact that you take ownership for certain areas, or if you're in the room, you make the decision. But if it's more complex, then you talk about it. How, on a practical level, how do you decide in the moment that this is something that really is more important for us to do collaboratively versus, let's take this action on that?
I think it's the discretion, really, and that discretion being aided by, again, I'm a broken record here, but trust, rapport, relationship. Knowing the more and more that we've come together on debating or agreeing on certain decisions, the more we gain data and information about how the other one operates, right? So when I kind of have to make a on-the-spot decision on behalf of the organization or on behalf of both of us, I'm usually pretty confident that this is what Jessica would have agreed to as well. And if it's not, then we have an opportunity to be like, okay, so what do we do? What do we do from here? What's the risk mitigation plan? How do we frame this? And then we go forward, right? But we rarely, if ever, have to do that because we know each other's preferences and tendencies quite well. Where there is a significant decision, we never feel pressured to. It's like, we'll get back to you on that. I just need to, to analyze or to consult with Jessica. But in most cases, we've just been able to say, we'll go forward with this. And I'm confident enough in that decision that if I need to kind of provide the rationale or explain to Jessica or bring her alongside of that after the fact, that can happen behind closed doors.
Yeah, and you Jessica, you used the phrase, hope it's okay. You said that you say that often. I hope it's okay I did this. And I'm kind of curious if there's ever been a discussion where it was like, oh yeah, I don't think that was okay, and how you navigated the conversation if something didn't quite land with you or you needed to redesign.
I'm trying to think of if there's been a specific moment where that's happened or a specific situation, but I think, like, I can think of times where, I've read an email that Byron wrote that I was CC'd on and went like, what? What are we doing? And, usually it's just a matter of, I think, approaching the issue from curiosity. Because, and we started with context. Usually the person who's more confident making the decision is the one who has the most context about what's going on. So it's more often a looping in piece. And so, when I say, tell me about why this went this way, the answer that I've gotten back has always satisfied, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then it's over. I think we do make a point of not, if there are little things, we bring them up. Like there's not a lot that we would just kind of let go. Like it would be there, it's the follow-up piece around, I didn't think that went that well, or when I said this, did you think this? And that sort of checking in to make sure that things are okay, because we wouldn't want anything building up. So address it while it's small, and then usually we can get through it pretty quick.
Yeah, curiosity, getting context, and addressing even the small things. And when you say all of that, it makes me like, co-CEO aside, those skills and those practices in organizational leadership, that feels like pretty essential with anyone that we collaborate or work with. But maybe it's more acute in your current model. And it makes me wonder, has practicing this co-CEO role changed any of your other relationships, like relationships with the staff that you work with, and maybe even relationships outside of the organization? This was not on my list, by the way, of questions that I gave you in advance, but putting you on the spot, yeah, I'm just curious if you working together in this model has then changed anything for your other relationships.
Well, we went almost like half an hour in the interview without bringing up the awkward relationship metaphor, but I'm going to do it. To me, it's actually felt more organic, like, so both Jessica and I are married. So I've been married to my wife for 9 years. And for me, it's like when we think about parenting or decisions that we're making about our family, it's not like, one person does it on behalf of both and the other person just has to live with it. Like at least for me, I've grown accustomed to sharing that role with another person and engaging in those processes of, consultation, better decision making, not letting small things become big things, right? And so for me, it's almost been the other way around, where this is a much more organic way for me to lead, a much more comfortable way with me to lead, not because I don't have confidence in my ability to lead as an individual, but because I've seen the benefits of leading as a collaborative or in a shared model, right? So whether that applies to your personal life and your family, or whether that applies to work, and that's what's been surprising to me. Like when we talk about the negatives or the challenges, most of it actually, I was trying to think of what have been the challenges in practice, because most of what I was thinking about was actually just the challenges in perception of the model, right? And the ineffectiveness. And for me, it's surprising to me that, there not a lot of people intuitively draw those parallels to other aspects of your life, and how often, doing it together is better than doing it alone.
That's what I think it brings to, when you're looking more broadly at collaboration. It's a question of, do you really believe that adding diverse perspectives makes for a better outcome? And so that's what our senior leadership or executive model is. But when you take it into the context of service delivery, I think, and working with other organizations, that's where, can one organization really do it all? Or are we better with a multitude of services and styles and approaches that we take as organizations responsibility to network together? That's our job, not clients. So that clients can experience that diverse range of thinking, and that I think ultimately gets to a more holistic model of service delivery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is pointing to the parallel process of being a co-lead model internally, what you want that to communicate about your values. And I know we're getting close to 2. I know you need to go soon, Anna. So I want to ask you about this from your perspective. Sure. What are you hoping this model is communicating out into the community?
Yeah, I mean, one of our focuses in the strategic plan is being sector leaders in collaboration. So I think it definitely shows that, even from our leadership structure down, we mean it, and we're willing to try different ways of leading, and hopefully modeling a very effective leadership relationship that can be applied. Some of those concepts certainly can be applied in terms of relationships and collaborative projects with other organizations. So that's kind of one of the sub benefits of this model. Definitely is that walking the talk and demonstrating that a different way of doing things can have a big benefit.
And what about internally? What are you hoping? Like, let's say there's a CFS staff member that's watching this, or watching the co-CEOs. What are you hoping this is communicating internally within the internal system of CFS? Anna.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to that leadership is relational, and leadership involves, it's about people and collaborative skills and being able to appreciate different perspectives and different points of view. And those skills and modeling those leadership behaviors, I think, has benefit across the organization. Definitely. So hopefully that staff see it as a positive. I mean, we think it's great because there's stability in the organization, and we've got 2 awesome leaders now that people kind of respect and appreciate. But certainly there's values that are being modeled there that are intentional and hopefully have a ripple effect down through the organization.
And I realized too, I didn't ask you about what you kind of are taking away for your other relationships from this model. And even though you're not one of the co-CEOs, you're still you're in it. So I'm just curious what you're applying from this experience to your other relationships.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in work, I'm a consultant, so many clients, and I'm part of a leadership team in my organization. So appreciating, the different perspectives and complementary skill sets and ability to really, collaborate on things. There's a lot of benefit of this model and kind of learnings that I'm being able to take and apply, certainly in my professional life. I actually work for an organization that has a co-CEO model. We've got 2 founders and they are co-CEOs. So I'm familiar with it, and I've seen it work well because of the nature of their relationship and the trust that Byron and Jessica have talked about today, and their complementary skill sets. Very different, 2 different people, but effectively lead as a co-model.
Yeah, and what was it about? I mean, it sounds like you've had broader experience with the co-lead model, and now that you've kind of seen it applied in your own company and then in CFS, what is there anything that you're noticing is like a thread between them, but also maybe a difference between the 2 applications?
Well, maybe it's a common thing or more of a thread, Nick, but the breadth of the role, like I think that there's a lot of expectations for a CEO.
Right.
And when you're leading programs and services and infrastructure and strategy, and like it's a broad set of skills, and it's a lot, right? And traditionally we want one person to be in charge and that, but what if we thought about it differently, and we thought about, these are all the things that leadership role has to support, and how do we get the best coverage, and how do we get more even out of that kind of model? So I think there's this recognition that it is broad and it's complex and there's a lot of change. And so does that traditional model, do we need to rethink that traditional model, I guess, for a better outcome?
I love that. Sometimes I look at job descriptions of senior leaders, CEOs, EDs, and I'm like, who is this person?
That's a unicorn. I mean, what is that person?
and this person is not yet like retired, but they've done all of these things. Right. They have all of this background. Yeah, it's a unicorn. Yeah. That's a good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Where are they? Because I don't see them around. Yeah.
Well, so appreciative of your perspective, and I know it's like a few minutes before your next thing, so just really deeply thanking you for your time and your contributions, and just the energy that you brought to this conversation. I'll maybe ask
That's my
Jessica and
pleasure.
Byron a few more questions, but yeah, I appreciate your time.
Sure. Okay. Well, I will nod off and let you guys continue on.
Thank
Thanks, you guys.
Take
Bye.
care. Another question that I had, you've brought it up a few times in this conversation and also in other conversations we've had. There's just this energy of fun, play, humor, sometimes self-deprecating humor even is in the mix, and I got really curious about that and wondered what role that plays in you being co-leads for the organization.
We haven't talked a lot yet about ego or the need to work without ego in the model. And that's something certainly that Byron and I have found to be really important, and that we have to be, I think, kind of brutally self-reflective about whether we're pushing for something so hard because we really believe it's the right thing for the organization, or because in my case, I really want to be right. And so I think that the play part and the laughter is part of what allows that ego stuff to kind of be in the open, right? As opposed to it being kind of an undercurrent. And then I think the other part of it is, we came in as young CEOs in an untested model, doing this 5-month job interview. Like, it's a bit of a pressure cooker.
In the middle of a pandemic.
Right. That's right. Yeah. You need a little bit of laughter and lightness. Yeah.
Like, to just and then no one has to like have all the answers or have it like we can kind of just be human and make fun of ourselves and say, oh my God, can you believe I said that in that meeting? Which is something I say a lot. And then we have a chance to kind of just let it go and not obsess about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, words that we use quite often are authenticity and vulnerability, right? Mm-hmm. And Jessica's spoken to this before, but if we kind of, model style of leadership where it seems like, we're untouchable from that, and it's not just about modeling; it's about sustainability in the role. If we kind of feel like we have to be these perfect version of ourselves that are immune from criticism or mistakes, my gosh, like we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation today. So, and for me, it's been huge. Like, I came from outside the sector, right? And so I don't have a social work or counseling background. I didn't grow up in the sector. I came from the corporate law sector. And so you can imagine how different the cultures are when you go from corporate law to, nonprofit and social services. And when I initially came in, I was terrified of engaging in any humor, because most of the time prior to coming to the organization, it was inappropriate humor. And I just I don't know what's okay to joke around about, and what's not okay. This is going to be huge. And so I feel like I need to be professional Byron, and that's it. And being immersed with people like Patricia, our former CEO, and Jessica, and being able to engage in the type of relationship where it's like, oh, not much is really off limits. We can make fun of one another because we know it's grounded in relationship. We know it's grounded in trust. We know the intent of what we're doing. So being able to do that, I think, has not only allowed me to be successful and thrive in my tenure with the organization, but I think it sets a different tone for the organization as a whole. When staff and everybody else sees, actually, you know what, these people don't take themselves that seriously. And I think that's a really good thing, is that's where you often get in trouble. So you start to think that you're more important than you are, or that you have to be this serious version of yourself to be the best version of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's making me curious now about the work that you've done, maybe even individually, because you in our conversations, the lightness has definitely been there, but also a lot of self-awareness. Just a lot of maturity of your spirit, not just your maturity of thought, but maturity in emotional intelligence and knowing self, being self-aware. And so I'm curious, what role that's played, and if there have been kind of key supports that you've got along the way in order to develop that.
There's a couple of things I can think of in this, and when you said key supports, it just made me go in a different direction. But Byron and I had a conflict over, well, it was a hiring decision, and I thought the decision had been made, and then Byron needed some more information, and wanted to slow things down a little bit, and I got really mad. In that case, actually, we used a coach that we work with to talk that one through, and she was able to surface that for some people, once a decision's been made, going back is really hard. And that's true in my case. And I came home and I told my husband, and he's like, you didn't know it was hard for you when the plan changes? Like, and then he said, poor Byron, he's been on the other side of it when the plan changes, right? And so I think there's every time there's conflict, there's an opportunity and a real calling, I think, in this model to look at, why is this so important to me? Why is this getting to me? And sort of a rigor in the honesty that you have to have with yourself to be able to continue to engage authentically in that conflict. And the humility, I think, is a really important, and that's probably where the humor comes into a little bit. But not that long ago, the two of us were on a call, and right near the ending of the call, it kind of went sideways, not with us and the other person. And so the call just didn't end on a good note. And I phoned Byron right afterwards, and I was like, you have to, like, that went so badly. Oh my God. Like, I was quite distressed. And Byron was like, well, I don't think it went that bad. And I'm like, no, I think we have to follow up. Like, I think and so we kind of went back and forth on how bad it was. And Byron just kind of flipped and said, you know what, I've been working with you long enough that I know if you're intuitively feeling that something went off at the end, that's usually right. So I will follow up with this person. And Byron did that entirely on trust of my gut feeling. And so then I didn't sleep that night, because I was like, oh my God, what if he has this follow-up conversation and I was wrong, right? What if it was fine? And ultimately, I think what we both got to was there's no harm, and in fact, only benefit that comes to the organization by having a follow-up conversation. So it's not really about whose perception of what happened in that meeting was right. It was about getting to what's the best outcome for the organization. And that usually, I think, is kind of our North Star that we'll get through when things start to feel complicated.
Yeah, there is that built-in accountability. I mean, we espouse these things of like humility, no ego, and it's part of, again, who we endeavor to be and values that we try to emulate. But at the same time, it's like, even if we were completely opposite to that, there's a built-in accountability to the model that requires you to enter into that, right? So when you think about it's a recognition. You talk about self-awareness, and sometimes it's not self-awareness, it's just awareness through this accountability of this model, where you start to come to grips with things that you may not have realized about yourself independently, right? And Jessica just named a great example there. But sometimes you have to be so intentional about understanding what agenda is driving a certain behavior or decision that doesn't surface until you're able to bring it to the forefront in discussion, right? So it's like the ability to open ourselves up to each other's influence and to the influence of like our greater team really is a big part of increasing that ability to be aware of how we're presenting to others, of what's might be happening internally that's driving a certain behavior. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to say it's because we are so mature and so emotionally intelligent that it just made this model work. But it's really, it's a chicken and egg thing, right? It's like the model brings that out in us and has helped us develop those skill sets and that growth as leaders.
Wow. I I feel like you've kind of spoke to this already, but I'm going to ask it again. Maybe in a sentence or two. What is the thing you most want to myth bust when it comes to people's perceptions of the co-leadership model?
Ooh, that we most.
Yeah,
That
most,
might
like
be
number
next.
one priority.
I think one of the things we heard a lot at the beginning, I'm not committing to this being the one I want to most myth bust, but I'm going to say one to get us started, is we heard a lot, well, what happens if you stalemate? That was a big question we heard from the board. We heard it externally, like what's going to happen if you guys can't get aligned on a decision? And for Byron and me, we were like, what? This is the issue? This is the thing that, because we had gone through over a year of conflict, lots of conflicts where we never hit a stalemate. And so, I think that's been something where, if we're not doing our jobs, if we're stalemating, we're not allowing that appropriate influence of each other, and we're definitely not making decisions in the best interest of the organization. And so I think it's a bit of a safeguard for an organization in making a decision that serves the interest of the organization versus making a decision that serves the ego of the CEO. Because in a decision that serves the ego of the CEO will stalemate. And so I think that would be like that conflict isn't bad would be the biggest thing, one of the biggest things that I'm not yet committed to. I'm gonna hear what Byron has to say because I might think he's right.
Yeah, it's very powerful though. I mean, hearing you say that, I mean, I actually even get goosebumps about how ego can play into it, and the word you said, safeguard. The co-lead model creates this safeguard. Yeah, that's very powerful. Byron, yours?
And Jessica will tell you this all day long, Nick. I never boiled things down to one or two sentences. But
just trying to challenge you a little.
Yeah. For me, if I can generally theme it, I would say that the model is inefficient or that it's ineffective. And so Anna spoke to, people might think it's expensive, people might think it's redundant, when in fact, we have reduced our executive office from 3 to 2 and achieved efficiencies and effectiveness through that. When I think about effectiveness, again, it's a matter of perspective and how you think about it. Some might carry the perspective, and you might naturally draw the conclusion. It's like, okay, we have 2 young CEOs, 2 relatively inexperienced CEOs, and so this model is like a baby CEO role. It enables 2 people that may have not otherwise been successful in the sole CEO role to lead an organization. And so I say this not out of a preservation of like my competencies and my skill sets, like purely about the model. When I think about it, one of the parallels that Jessica and I drew is like, again, if you think about an executive office of any organization, when is it ever just one person? So even if we wanted to draw the closest parallel, we said, okay, well, let's say that our roles are akin to a CEO role and a COO role. The only difference that we're doing is we're making a different valuation that a COO role and in our environment and with the way that the sector has changed and the expectations, that the traditional functions of what a CEO traditionally oversaw versus what a director of operations or COO traditionally oversaw are not hierarchical. They actually bring up equal value and are contribute equally to the organization. So, irrespective of which parallels you want to use or how you want to frame it, for us, it's like, sometimes it's hard to get over this notion of like, oh, that can't be shared. There can't be 2 people in a traditionally one person role. And whether we're talking about effectiveness, whether we're talking about efficiency or sustainability, anything. And that's why I had a hard time identifying what are the actual downsides, the risks, and the challenges in practice. And for me, I haven't experienced it to date.
Yeah, you kind of said more. It's more about perception. The downsides are perceptional, not practical.
Right.
Yeah. In closing, just a a big open question. You know, is there anything that I didn't ask that I should have?
I don't know. I mean, I was thinking about this all through the interview because it was coming up, and the conversation just flowed away from it. But I think the big thing for us, uh, alongside all the benefits that we've talked for the model, for us as individuals, for the organization, one of the things that we were quite cognizant of, and this speaks to, you know, the leading without ego, but in how, not just in the sector, but with any organization, we can fall victim to the founder syndrome, or to have the identity of the leader so wrapped up in the identity of the organization that, you know, that the change in transition becomes almost detrimental for the organization. And for us, that's one of the healthy benefits, right? It's like, we don't want this organization to become synonymous with Byron or with Jessica, or even with the two of us, because at the end of the day, it's not about us, right? It's about the people that we serve. It's about the purpose that we seek to achieve. That is really that matters at the end of the day. And if there's any attachment to the organization by virtue of an attachment to either one of us or both of us as individuals, we haven't really done our jobs as CEOs to not only put the organization in a better place, but to actually serve the cause that we seek to serve. The healthy thing about this model is that, you know, early on as we pursued these roles, Jessica and I were so aligned that, you know, we're not taking these roles because it fulfills our ultimate goal of climbing the nonprofit ladder. So yes, we found ourselves at the highest level in our organization. It was never our ambition to have those three letters behind our name. And even though this sounds a little bit counter to what we should be doing as CEOs, it was never our ambition to build CFS to be the golden child of the nonprofit sector, right? Like, we've always approached our work from a very sector level perspective, from an understanding of what role is CFS playing, and by extension, us as the leaders of the organization playing in contributing to a better sector overall, a better community overall. And holding each other accountable to that through this model has really enabled us to stay aligned and, you know, for lack of a better term, in compliance or accountable to this vision that we had set out together. Right. So I wouldn't have it any other way when I think about why is it that we chose to take these jobs, and what are we seeking to achieve together, and this model really helps align with that vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about for you, Jessica? What's coming up?
Well, I really love when I get asked a question that I don't know the answer to, and then Byron talks for a while, so I have time to figure it out. That's really and the thing that came to mind was actually, as Byron was speaking, is around, and I don't think we've fully kind of surfaced the power of this or understand it, but there's something about this model and sector disruption. And I think our board did something quite courageous by initiating putting young leaders in, first of all, and then in this co-lead model. And I think Byron mentioned the loneliness in the CEO role earlier. If you're going to challenge the status quo, that's scary, that's vulnerable, that's, you know, career risking at times. And so to do that where you know you have somebody kind of behind you, I think really allows for a greater courage to be disruptive, to question, why are we doing things this way? Because you're not the only voice that's saying it. And so, you know, sometimes we'll be in meetings, often Zoom now, and, you know, one of us will type a message to the other that says, I'm going for it. Like, I'm gonna say something that's not gonna be popular, or I'm whatever. And almost always the other one is right behind, backing up that perspective. And so if our sector is at a point where there's a recognition of some of the inefficiencies in the way we work, in recognizing that we need to move to a more client-centered system of care as opposed to organization-centered system of care, we're going to have to change the way that we're working. And so, you know, you need the one who's willing to say it and the first follower to get behind. And that's what this model has built in for it. And so, you know, that's not to say Byron and I are big sector disruptors, but it is to say I think there's something to this in terms of questioning the status quo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I said that was the last question, right? But there's something in here about, you know, and maybe I'll even think about it too, but what we imagine disruption within the sector could create within the next generation or generations from now. You know, there's something to what you're saying, Jessica, about the disruption that's really important for our sector. And it feels to me like it's going to happen. It is happening. It's necessary. And it's actually not even just nonprofit. It's all of our systems that are really needing disruption, needing to move more towards, you know, living systems thinking and understanding that things are complex, or not, like we can't simplify them with this pyramid structure, with one way of looking at things, with one way of doing things. We need diversity of thought, diversity of approach, co-leads, yes, and other ways of doing things too. So I wonder if we could close by just saying what we imagine is possible with the disruption, because we all care deeply about nonprofit, with disruption in the nonprofit sector, what's really possible.
Well, maybe we'll speak to this from our respective sides of the organization. You know, a big focus of mine is the way that we understand philanthropy within the sector. You know, and what I'm saying is not going to be groundbreaking or earth shattering, or, you know, I won't posit that it's, you know, my sole perspective, but, you know, we in the not-for-profit sector, you can get in this habit of operating for sustainability. And I think around the table, most people will say, well, we got to work to put ourselves out of business. And what does that mean? You know, and what does it mean when you're faced with a declining economy in the midst of a pandemic, and you're looking at your bottom line and being like, how are we going to sustain? How are we going to generate revenue? How are we going to grow? You know, and for us, and holding ourselves accountable to, you know, the way that we want to lead and the vision that we're trying to work towards. It's like, it matters how you choose to engage the community in the work that you do. You know, and I think default, or the low-hanging fruit, is to engage the community in a way that serves your bottom line the best, most efficiently, most effectively. And then, you know, reach your goal, and then rinse and repeat when the calendar turns. And for us, it's like, you know, if we actually want to affect change within how we work in the sector, yes, it is a lot about how we serve the people that we serve. It's equally important to talk about how we're intentionally choosing to engage the greater community, whether that's funders, donors, volunteers, you know, people that aren't yet involved in the organization, and changing the narrative away from a charitable model to one that of reciprocity. You know, some of the language that we've been using is, you know, regardless of which side of the coin that you're on in this equation, or in terms of how you participate with the organization, we want people to understand and see that we're not that far removed from being on the other side, right? So whether you're a client that could eventually become, or be in the position of donating time or resources, or vice versa, that are actually, our stories aren't that far removed from one another. And, you know, but for a few different life circumstances, or but for accident of birth, we could be entirely different places. And so, you know, it's a real challenge for us to hold ourselves accountable to how are we going to choose to communicate about the people that we serve and what we do? You know, to try to make the quick buck, there might be the temptation to try to frame the people that we serve as the most vulnerable, the most deserving of money, the most dire and in need, and then to draw upon guilt or kind of a hero complex of donors to be able to see that they, because of their involvement in them stepping in, they've been able to transform the lives of the people they supported. And for us, it's like, we don't want to contribute and to reinforce that unhealthy narrative that might exist in the community. And we're much more interested in a long-term approach, that not only is good for the sustainability of what we do as an organization, but hopefully it helps to change what, the traditional meritocracy type of mindset that people may hold about where people find themselves in their situations, and that, wherever you find yourself, you've earned that, or you've made decisions to put yourself there. And so, for us, when we think about building strong families, yes, it's about people to serve. How are we helping to change the narrative and the understanding that those that aren't that familiar with the not-for-profit sector or the social services sector, about things like, brain science, about impacts of adversity, trauma, abuse, and mental health, and all these complex factors that makes our work incredibly difficult. So we hold that responsibility quite seriously.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw my eyes widen at the word reciprocity. It just feels like that's my favorite word right now. And I love what you mentioned. What you say about shifting the fundraising. It's not even just about fund development. It's how we're talking about the work that we're doing as a sector is, as the broader societal conversations that we're having, and shifting towards more reciprocity and less of the drama around rescuing and victims. And it feels like that's a beautiful dream that that the disruption is helping create. Yeah. So Jessica, for you.
I like that dream a lot. I also like it. It has to do with how organizations work together differently. And, I've certainly seen and fallen into this myself, that the habit of thinking that goes, my client, my program, my division, my organization. And this is the way we do my thing. And to get to a place where we can think differently about how we do things, that they're not my things, to get to a more co-creative place that is ultimately going to, take the best of the brilliance that exists across our sector and knits it together in a way that clients have access to more of that by coming through whichever door they come in. I think that would be sort of the hope for what we're able to do. I think the more we restrict our thinking based on what's always been done or what my organization does, the less there is life in what we do, and the less we're able to serve clients to sort of maximum benefit that we might be able to. And that's clients and their families, because somebody might come to us with one need, but they have a spouse or a brother or a child whose needs would be well met through another organization. And wouldn't it be easier if we worked together differently on that? And so I think as a sector, we have work to do. It's a tall order, I think, because nothing is set up right now to do that kind of work. Everything is set up, our information sharing agreements, our client consent forms, like the infrastructure isn't there yet, how we're funded and contracted to do services, right? And so I think we have to prepare ourselves. These are uphill battles. This is pushing a boulder uphill, and it's going to feel uncomfortable every time we do it. But I think it's the successes around clients who can access multiple services as if they're from one organization. That's where I think we'll really see a lot of change on some of the issues that are affecting us and the people we serve the most.
Yeah, and maybe a lot of work, but the end result sounds almost a little bit easier, just like what you're talking about with the co-creativity between the two of you in this model, potentially organizationally in time. There's,
Although my answer didn't make your eyes light up, Nick, though, so I don't.
I just love the word reciprocity, but I'm taking reciprocity and co-creativity. I'm loving both of those ideas and words. So thank you, both of you, for those gifts of those specific words and ideas, and also just the energy that you bring to all of the conversations we have. I really always enjoy talking to both of you. So until next time, yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciated.
Thank you so much.